Be the envy of the neighborhood. 860 KKAT, where the grass is always greener. Welcome to Gardening Utah. Here's composter and show hoster, Jenna Francis.
Welcome to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jenna Francis. Every week here on Gardening Utah, we give you gardening inspiration and advice and tips and tricks from experts across the state. And we talk about all things plants, bugs, diseases, evergreens, your favorite shrubs, you name it. Thank you so much for listening. I really hope this show is something that you look forward to checking in with every single week. Episodes drop every Friday on Apple Podcasts. And to keep you inspired through the winter, it's so dark right now. And it's so fun to think about gardening. And believe it or not, there's a lot of things that we can still do this time of year to prepare for the upcoming growing season. And that is what we're going to be all about this winter. Make sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts so that you never miss an episode. And this show also airs on KKAT 860 AM right here in Utah on the weekends at 10 a.m. Now, I'm getting a lot of questions lately on, how do I subscribe and listen to your show on my phone? Okay, so if you've never actually listened to podcasts regularly, if you have an iPhone, it's super easy. All you need to do is search for the app called Podcasts. It's right now, it's got kind of a purple microphone. And you find that podcast app, you open it up, and you just search for the word Gardening Utah inside the app, and it will bring up our little state of Utah with greenery all over it, and it will say Gardening Utah. You open that up and hit subscribe, and if you're just new to our show or you're listening on KKAT, you can go listen to all the past episodes. So we started this show last March, and we've got a lot of very informational shows that you can go back and listen to and binge listen to all winter long while you're dreaming of spring and planning for spring. And I know that all the way back in last March when we recorded some of our very first episodes, they were so informative with tasks that you need to do at that time, but also things you could have done over the winter to really have a beautiful spring. And we've really covered a lot of that in the last recent episodes. And I wanted to give a particular shout out to a past episode that will be an amazing one to go back and listen to if you are planning to either landscape a brand new yard or maybe do some renovations on your existing yard. If you have any sort of area in your yard that you are planning on doing something new with, go back to episode 10. Episode 10 was with Cynthia B. from Localscapes. Now, Localscapes is an amazing way that you can landscape your yard for our climate and environment. And Cynthia walks through step by step the things that you need to consider, from pathways to entertainment areas to garden areas, where to put your grass and that kind of a thing, and how to make sure you're irrigating it properly and you set that up from day one. So anyway, if you're putting anything together in 2021 for your yard, you're definitely going to want to go back and give episode 10 a listen. All right. Well, before I tell you who the incredible guest is in today's show that I am so incredibly excited and honored to have on the show today, right before that, we're going to get to the tip of the week.
860 KKAT with your Gardening Utah tip of the week.
My tip of the week is how to care properly for those poinsettias that you've purchased. Now, this tip of the week is from Mike Goldberg, who is the owner of the nursery and grower Quality Flowers and Plants. And he joined me back in episode 25 and told us exactly what to do. Let's listen in. Okay, so tell me a little bit about when you buy the poinsettia, what is the best care that people can give them?
Well, the biggest problem people have in this area is they will water it in the afternoon, then the temperature in your house drops and the roots start rotting. That's very easy to happen. So we tell people that to water in the morning on the days in which they water. And what we do is tell them, instead of putting their finger into the pot to see if it needs water or not, we tell them to lift the plant up. If it's heavy, they don't need to water it. If it's light, then they do. And after a while, you figure out how often you need to water. Because if it's light, that means there's no water in there. If it's heavy, there's plenty of water.
That's an excellent, excellent tip.
Yeah.
And now as far as lighting goes, I know that a lot of the poinsettias end up in office buildings and in dark rooms. What kind of lighting do they need, or at that point, is it just decorative and they're fine?
You don't need to worry about lighting, because when you buy a poinsettia, you want to buy it in full bloom. If it's like halfway through the bloom process and you buy it and take it, it'll stop coloring up. That's when you end up with a bloom that's got red and maybe little bits of green around the edges.
Okay.
But, not like maybe an inch around the edges, not quarter inch, but yeah.
Okay, that's an excellent tip. And I know a lot of the poinsettias have the aluminum, sort of that aluminum foil decorative with the coloring around the outside of the pot. Do you suggest that that's removed?
It'll grow better without that, but most people put it on because they want something decorative.
Yeah.
If you can let air go through the bottom of the pot and up, it's always better for a plant. Whether it's a poinsettia or an azalea or mum or any plant, that's always better. But people want to see something decorative. It's also a matter of where you're displaying it. If you're putting it on the ground by a Christmas tree, maybe people won't see the bottom of the pot. Depending upon the size you buy. If you buy one in a 6-inch or 6.5-inch pot, you're going to see the pot. If you buy one in an 8.5-inch pot, you probably won't see the pot because the plant will have a head on it that's maybe 30 inches across.
And that was the tip of the week.
Never miss a tip for your garden. Never miss a tip for your garden. And never miss an episode. The Gardening Utah Podcast with Jana Francis, the KKAT.
Now, if you haven't been to Quality Flowers and Plants, you've definitely got to go. 33rd South, and it's like 1046 East. And it's just absolutely gorgeous, especially right now. The selection of rare and cool and different varieties of poinsettias are outstanding. So definitely go have a look. And if you haven't bought poinsettias this year, it's a great place to go. Say hi to Mike Goldberg for me. He is such a cool guy and he has such a wealth of information. And if you want to listen to his episode, it is full of amazing information on poinsettias and all the new varieties. It's episode 25 of Gardening Utah, and it's a fun one to listen to this time of year around Christmas time. So definitely give that a listen. Episode 25. I am so excited right now for today's episode. We have the horticulture director from Red Butte Gardens with us today. Her name is Marita Tewes Tyrolt, and she is going to be giving us so much incredible information, not just on Red Butte Garden, but on a lot of the plants that they're growing that will do so well in all of our yards. And if you haven't been to Red Butte, my goodness, what is stopping you? It is so incredible. It's one of my favorite places in the whole state of Utah. I definitely suggest becoming a member. You can go to redbuttegarden.org and look to see. It is not expensive, and you can go tour the garden whenever you want. You can be inspired. I have so many amazing memories there, everything from incredible concerts. My son's best friend got married there. I was nominated for Entrepreneur of the Year in 2012 and 13, and they did the sort of event dinner, pre-dinner there, and it was just magical and incredible. So I have incredible memories there, and I just want to inspire everyone else in Utah to go have your own incredible memories there too if you haven't yet. So right after this break, we'll be back with Marita from Red Butte Garden. Stay with us.
She's more than just gardening puns and sage advice. It's Gardening Utah with Jana Francis on 860 KKAT. Gardening Utah, available wherever you get your podcasts and at 860kkat.com/garden. Here's Jana Francis.
Welcome back to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis, and I'm so excited because with me today is Marita Tewes Tyrolt, the horticulture director from Red Butte Gardens. Welcome to Gardening Utah.
Thank you for having me.
I am so excited, and I was saying earlier in the episode that when I originally thought about this podcast and wanting to create something where I could really talk to the experts around the state of Utah, I immediately thought of Red Butte Gardens because it is such a place that it holds so much meaning to me for a lot of different reasons. I just have so many memories of touring the gardens and getting so much inspiration from the just the beautiful plants and the different areas. And when I envisioned having you on the show, of course, it was pre-COVID and partial shutdowns and social distancing and that kind of a thing. So I assumed our conversation would be a little different. But so tell me, what has been changing over at Red Butte Gardens this year?
Well, this year has been a challenge for us as well as a number of cultural institutions and others. One thing that a lot of people don't know about Red Butte Garden is they think that we are funded by the state and by the university. And we do get some funding from them, but it's in the single digits. We have to raise annually over 90% of our operating budget.
Wow.
And we do that a lot of ways. We do that by concerts and by having private events and garden admission. And we have 2 fundraiser plant sales a year and various programming. And then, of course, there's, people who make generous donations or gifts to the garden. And then there's the ZAP tax that we get some funds from. But COVID really hit pretty hard this year because it hit so many of those revenue streams. We couldn't have concerts. We really couldn't have too many private events because most people want to have more than 10 or 20 people attend their wedding. So a lot of people have postponed those. We couldn't have our spring plant sale. And then, of course, we were closed March, April, and May, which is the highest visitation we have throughout the entire year. So it just really, my boss says that we lost about 70% of our income for the year.
Wow.
So we've made adjustments, though. We had our Arbor Day celebration, a virtual Arbor Day celebration online, and had some visual tours of going through the garden for Arbor Day. And the programs department worked to put what they called some boredom busters on the web for activities that families could do with their kids. And so I think that those were popular. I even went online and kind of took the link and shared it with my siblings so they could do those things with their kids.
Yeah.
And we've had to make some quick adjustments too, just to be offering a lot of classes on Zoom, like many other people have.
Yes.
And then kind of later in the season, we have gotten some funding from the CARES Act and through the Utah legislators. They approved some funding for us. And so the month of October, we were able to have what we called a botanical program. It's similar to the Garden After Dark program that we've done in the past, but this one was a pared down, socially distanced, timed entry event, but we had 7 different stations throughout the garden, and each of them were just decorated really wonderfully, and people had such a great time. We got so many letters from people saying that, they were just so happy with it, that it's kind of like something that you can do that's outdoors with your kids, and you don't feel like there's so many people crowding around you, not paying attention to social distancing. And so we had a lot of great feedback from that. And we couldn't have done it without the CARES Act and without the Utah legislator approving those funds. So that was really great. And then right now, staff are working on another grant that we got, again, from the CARES Act, and that's called the Community Partners Grant. And so, again, we're creating some new classes for online delivery, and those will be available sometime in 2021. I'm not exactly sure which, and it depends on which class, because depending on the topic would determine when is the appropriate time to deliver that class.
I see.
Well, and we've had some great donors too. There's been a number of our concert donors that even though we weren't able to have a concert series this year, that they still gave us the normal donation, which is really fabulous that there are, those people out there that feel that strongly about what we do and want to help out. So that's been great. So
yeah, that's really generous.
I think I would just, say that I've heard people say that, those people who can help should, and, and I'll just use that opportunity to say that, for those that are more fortunate than others, that this is a great time to reach out and either help Red Butte Garden or help some of the other cultural institutions that are in the state, because, it's not just us, it's others, like the Fine Arts Museum or the zoo, or, I'm sure there's others, and those people that can, it would be great if you can help out those cultural institutions that are really struggling this year.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't realize the impact, and it's so extreme. I mean, just to think of the concert revenue alone, missing that. I mean, I myself go to at least 4 or 5 a year. It's something I look so forward to, just packing a beautiful picnic and going early and enjoying the scenery and the sunsets at a concert at Red Butte Gardens. There is nothing like it in Utah. Honestly, it's one of my most favorite experiences. Listen to a little Steve Miller Band and then the sunset. Oh, my word.
Yes. My family has enjoyed a great time there as well, too. So looking forward to 2021 and getting back to normal.
Boy, absolutely. So what are some of the classes that you envision will be coming up that people can take online?
Well, I know some of them. One of our ladies did a class on microgreens. She really does a lot of growing microgreens in her basement, and I think that it is a favorite pastime for her, and something that is. It's a mental wellness activity. One of our ladies does, a lot of growing microgreens in her basement, and she just really enjoys that. And this opportunity came up with the CARES Act Community Partners Grant, and she's like, why not? Why not me? I know a lot about it. I can share that info, and seems to be something that's gaining importance these days.
Yeah, microgreens is really making a huge, it's a very trendy thing right now. It's a lot of fun to do. I've been doing it with my spring onion sprouts or my spring onion seeds. They're amazing.
Another one of our staff, she is an expert on lavender and things that I wouldn't be able to begin to talk to you about. I mean, I'm not just talking about cultivars of lavender. She is an expert at knowing what different chemical compounds are in the lavender and what effect that then has. Because, lavender is something that's really used in aromatherapy. And so you might know that lavender is used in aromatherapy, but you don't know what compounds it is and what, impacts that has. And so she is doing a class on lavenders.
That sounds amazing.
So, yeah. And another one of our gentlemen is doing a class on pruning fruit trees, I believe. So we have had somebody do a class on fruit trees in the past, but he wanted to take that to the next level. And so he's been working on that. So yeah, there'll be a number of neat classes coming out for next year.
That's really exciting. Do you think that there will be a plant sale next year?
Gosh, I really hope so. And I think, I'm hopeful that with them, you can't talk about that without talking about COVID and when the vaccine is and how many people get the vaccine. I have asthma, so as soon as I'm able to get in line, I will be in line.
Yeah.
But, I really hope that by early May, that things are looking better and that we can at least have a plant sale. It may not look like what our plant sales have looked in the past, kind of thinking it might be a little pared down. We usually like to have as much of anything and everything we can get a hold of so that there's a huge selection. I think that for 2021, we'd have to focus on what we think is just really the core selection that people are have just got to have, and at least focus on that for 2021, and then hopefully 2022 we can get back to what the plant sale was always been in the past.
Yeah, that's where I love to pick up just some real native varieties that we know grow so well in Utah.
Right. We've really focused for a number of years of having a great selection of native and water-wise. We've kind of had those two sections together. Just because something's water-wise doesn't mean it's native, nor vice versa.
Right.
But we've usually had little tags on or labels in front of the plants that indicated whether it was native or whether it was non-native but water-wise.
Yeah. Speaking of tags, that's one of the things that I love so much about walking around Red Butte Gardens, because I love how so many, well, most, if not all, all of the plant material from the trees to the shrubs to all the way down to the herbs are marked, and it teaches you so much more when you're able to attribute the name with the plant. And you don't realize how much it does add, but I've gone through and I just take pictures of every single one that then I want to bring into my yard, and it's
right.
It's just such a beautiful showcase of what can be done.
Right. And that's what actually makes the garden a museum of living plants or a botanical garden as opposed to a park.
Yeah.
We have those plant labels out. We always get somebody who says, you need more labels. And it's always kind of this juggling thing between having enough and not having too much.
Right. Yeah, that's true. Because it can be, I could see how there's got to be a fine balance there. Well, and Red Butte Gardens covers over 100 acres, and there's so many different gardens, and they're suited for so many different kinds of plants and landscapes, and so many different themed gardens as we walk throughout. So when we come back after this break, Marita's going to be giving us a little bit of a virtual tour of things like the fragrance garden and the medicinal garden and other gardens around Red Butte. Stay with us.
860 KKAT with Jenna Francis and Gardening Utah, where it's always mulch time. She really does have the nicest yard on the block. It's Gardening Utah with Jenna Francis on 860 KKAT.
Welcome back to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jenna Francis, and with me is Marita Tewes Tyrolt, Horticulture Director at Red Butte Gardens. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
So we were talking before the break about the labels and how I love how you can learn so much by walking around Red Butte Gardens and see the different labels of the trees and the shrubs. And, you had mentioned that a botanical garden is a museum of living plants. And that is just such a, for a garden geek like me, it's just so fun to even envision walking around. And I love going to Red Butte and all the different themed areas. Tell us, if one of our listeners has never been there, tell us about some of the unique and themed areas and what's kind of growing in those.
Great. Well, we've got about 21 acres of developed gardens inside our fence. And with that, there's about 10 themed gardens. There's a few other areas that we don't necessarily consider a themed garden, like our amphitheater, but there are 10 areas that are themed. And one of them, I guess, just to pick a place and start, is our Four Seasons garden. And, to me, that just kind of sounds like most people should understand what that is. It's a garden that has interest in multiple seasons. And so we've tried to have plants that has some interest in the spring, fall, and summer and winter, sorry.
Yeah.
And, they do that different ways. I mean, it's just some plants. One of my favorites is a Russian Hawthorn. And the flowers are just so beautiful in the spring. And the foliage is gorgeous. And the fruit on it is a little bit larger than some of the other hawthorns that you would get. And it's kind of a rosy red, and it's just so abundant. And we just get a lot of comments on that particular plant. Anyway, that's in the Four Seasons garden.
Interesting.
But anyway, And then we've got some ornamental grasses in that area that look good not only in the fall, but also in the winter. We've also tried to focus on a few showy conifers that have got just different habits and shapes. There are so many conifers out there that you could just about find something for any particular location, no matter what kind of soil it needed or the height or the width or whatever. There just is so many choices. We have a beautiful spruce there. It's called a Picea glauca pendula. It's a very upright, it's very, very, very tall and narrow. And ours right now, I don't know, maybe it's 30 foot tall. And it's only maybe 3 foot wide or something, but it's just absolutely gorgeous.
Wow.
So that's actually in the courtyard right outside our back door.
Okay. I think I know exactly which one you're talking about. It's amazing.
Yeah, that one's gorgeous. So, and other plants, there's a Rudbeckia Herbstonne that's in the Four Seasons garden that I really like. It gets about 7 foot tall so it's something that maybe for somebody's yard, it's not something you would put near the edge. You put it in the background, but it blooms for a long period of time, gets pretty tall and just gorgeous yellow flowers. So, a variety of things. And, actually another plant we just planted in there maybe 3 or so years ago is a Salix helvetica. It's called a Swiss willow. But we had a particular area that just is down near the bottom of the hill, and just the way that the water drains off the hill and doesn't quite go into the drain that was intended to take that water. And so it's just kind of a sumpy, wet spot. And we've tried some other things that we were never happy with. And we tried the Salix helvetica, and it's taking off nicely. It's filling in, and it still hasn't quite filled in all the way we want it to, but it's looking like it will. And so feeling good about that choice for that area.
Oh, I love that.
And if that, for your listeners, that just is good gardening practice for anything. It's, you look at your garden and you look at this problem area that hasn't really been working, and you just kind of look at why it hasn't been working and start researching a plant that is going to fit that particular little microclimate. Rather than trying to fix the microclimate, embrace it and find some wonderful plant that is going to be really happy in that spot. So
that's such a great tip.
Yep.
I love that. One of my favorite places at Red Butte as well is the herb garden.
The Decker family, I believe, paid for that.
Okay.
And I hope that in saying that I'm correct and I haven't made a mistake. I tend not to necessarily remember which donor paid for which garden. So, but we call the terrace gardens is made up of the herb, medicinal, and fragrance garden.
That's
and they're
right.
kind of in that order when you visit the garden. So once you leave the Four Seasons garden and then start heading out further, you'll come across the terrace gardens, and that's the herb, medicinal, and fragrance. And I think that the purposes of those gardens too maybe sound like a given. It's not like you really have to explain that.
Yeah.
In the middle of the terrace gardens, we have a boxwood parterre that culinary herbs are planted around. And then the east section of the herb garden, we've got some beverage plants. And we have a few other areas where we do some edible flowers or some dye plants.
And what do you mean by beverage plants?
Well, there's a lot of herbs that are used in beverages.
I see. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So like what?
Like hops,
of course,
are used in beers, and so we've got that growing up over the bench. We actually have a sassafras tree in the beverage section of the herb garden, so it took us quite a lot of effort to get that one, but we've it's doing fine.
Wow.
And you can also use mints or in teas. There's just a variety of different plants that you can make beverages out of. There's a particular artemisia that you can use to make absinthe with.
Oh, really? That's so cool. Dye garden, is that for plants that have a really deep color?
It's kind of hard to do maybe a dye garden well because we're limited in space. And the truth is there are so many plants out there that can be used for dyes that you could dedicate a whole garden to that and just still really not touch it.
Yeah.
There's just, whether you're using the bark or you're using the roots or the seeds or flower petals, there's just so many plants that can be used for dyes. And so I'd like to tell you that I was maybe proud of our dye garden, but it's really small.
Okay. But how interesting, though. I never even thought of doing something specific like that. And that's why one reason I love Red Butte Garden so much, Yeah. So it's so inspiring. And even just to walk a child through that area, I mean, maybe they'd never even thought or considered that dyes and colorings are made from plants,
Right. Even common things that you have in your home, like one of the typical used dye thing is the skins off of an onion.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's just a ton of plants that you can use for dyes.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating.
She's more than just gardening puns and sage advice. It's Gardening Utah with Jenna Francis on 860 KKAT. 860 KKAT with more of the fastest growing show on radio. It's Gardening Utah with Jenna Francis.
Welcome back to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jenna Francis, and with me here is Marita Tewes Tyrolt, Horticulture Director at Red Butte Garden, and we are going to continue the virtual tour now.
Well, next is the medicinal garden, and that has gone through some renovation in the last few years. The trees were getting too large and shading out too many of the plants, and so we removed a few of those because there's so many medicinal plants that would actually like to get a little sun. So we've done some renovation in there and improved the plantings, and then our gal, Angie Decker, who's in charge of that area, has been working on doing a different theme in the medicinal garden each year. And so maybe 2 years ago, we did something on forest healing, and last year was cancer-fighting flora. And this year, she's got a mental and emotional wellness theme in there, which when we were working on that, or when she was working on that, the winter of 2019, 2020, we had no idea that it was going to be such a timely topic.
Wow.
So,
yeah.
So anyway, she's got some signage in there about plants that can be used for wellness. And, some of it is because you might make a soothing tea, but some of it is therapy, aromatherapy, and a few other ideas. So the signage is still up in the medicinal garden, and we're going to leave it up for 2021 as well. And so people can come and kind of read some of the thoughts about mental and emotional wellness and some of the plants that might be helpful with that. So
that's what I call some really inspired planning.
Our fragrance garden is kind of the last piece of the terrace gardens, and it's one of the very most popular spots in the garden to have a wedding. And it's just like the garden says, it's a fragrance garden. So we've tried to have a wide variety of plants that are blooming or have fragrance at some time of the year. And sometimes it's the flowers that are fragrance, but sometimes it's the foliage. And so it just kind of depends. Some plants give off their fragrance freely. Some of them, like a mint, you'd have to break the leaves and crush it to get that scent.
Right.
So anyway, there's some great plants in there too. Well, some of them are annuals, like the flowering tobacco, like a nicotiana.
Yeah.
Those are fragrant, but they're not all fragrant, and so you have to be careful. It's like one of the best one is the Nicotiana alata, which gets fairly tall. I don't know, maybe 4 foot tall or something like that, and has a white flower that blooms more in the afternoon, but it's very fragrant and a nice plant.
I love that plant. It smells incredible in the evenings.
Another one is Agastaki hummingbird mint, and there's a number of different cultivars out of Agastaki, so you can get some that might bloom in a reddish, orangish rust color, or there's some of them that are out that are maybe like a salmon color, and others that are a yellow, some that are bluish, and so they come in a number of colors, and it's a great plant. The only thing that we've really noticed is we lose about a third of them every year. It's perennial, but I would say that it's marginally perennial, and so we've kind of learned to say that we need to buy X many every year to fill in what we know isn't going to come back, but it's still just such a great plant. And it, once it starts blooming in the summer, it's blooming for the rest of the year until the frost kicks it back. And so,
wow.
So great plant. Another area is our children's garden, which I'm sure most families know that's a space that we have in the garden and is well loved. And then our floral walk kind of takes you from the terrace garden area down to the lower section of the garden where we have our rose garden. So that floral walk is kind of a transition. And it has several different sections. It has a section up top that we call the Mediterranean. Not that it has plants from the Mediterranean, but it has that feel because of its exposure. And then we've got the woodland. And then there's a section where we've got some wonderful arbors that were designed by Rob McFarland, who used to be the owner of the garden store that's down on 7th and 7th. Anyway, and we've got pears that are being trained up over those arbors. And so that looks wonderful.
Wow.
So, and then it kind of goes down from there to the rose garden. One of the plants that I love along the floral walk is it's a paper bark maple. It's Acer griseum. It's a small maple and maybe only gets about 20 foot tall, but the bark is just gorgeous the way it peels off, and so that's an absolute favorite. And there's a hibiscus coccineus, or a scarlet rose mallow that's in that area that people comment on that every year. So I know it's a favorite. We'll get calls all the time if something's wrong with that label about what is that plant. And we know what it is because it gets a fairly decent size. It gets maybe 5 foot tall or something, and it has large red flowers. And so
don't they get like sometimes like the size of your hand, or sometimes even the first bloom or two, like a dinner plate, right?
Right. Yes.
They are such eye stoppers.
Yep. And that section is also where we have a good portion of our lilac collection. So in April, May, there's just several cultivars of lilacs that are blooming in that area. So, not only does it smell fabulous, you can just see several different kinds of lilacs with different flower colors. So, and then in the rose garden, that's one of our newer gardens. It opened in 2009. And it has different sections to it, I guess like our other spaces do. There's a small little section of the rose garden that we refer to as the red garden that has red roses and red other plants. And there's a section around our rose house, which is a reception center that is in the rose garden but doesn't actually have roses in it.
Right.
But that area is focusing on white flowering plants. So white flowering roses and other plants that have got white. And we kind of did that on purpose because, again, if women are having receptions there, we wanted the bride to be the star of the show and not have colors in that area that conflicted with whatever color she wanted to have.
Yes.
But then there's other areas that just kind of focuses on maybe blush colors, or there's the wall. There's a ring. We call it the ring garden, but it's a circular wall area, and that has warm tones of roses. We've really wanted the rose garden to be different from any other rose garden that you might come across. We don't want it to be ugly rows of roses. We want it to be roses and companion plants, to see that it really can be incorporated in your landscape the same way that anything else is.
Yeah.
And we've got lots of examples of roses in that garden. There's several different classes of roses, and we have an example of every class of rose that is hardy in Utah. And so there's just a variety from shrub roses to polyanthas to tea roses and climbers and grandifloras.
Yeah, floribundas.
It's the place to really come kind of see that rose is so much more than maybe what a lot of people might think that they are.
Absolutely. And that is such a beautiful area.
Yes. A couple of my favorite roses, just to name a few, is there's one that's a shrub rose. It's called Eye Opener. And probably hard to find, but it's kind of a short rose that only gets about 18 inches tall, maybe 3 or 4 feet wide, and has red clusters of small flowers with white or yellow stamens in the middle, which is really striking, I think.
Yeah.
And there's another one, Golden Wings, that gets about 6 or 7 foot tall. It's kind of a single yellow rose, but it has a mild tea fragrance, but it also gets really showy hips in the fall, and so that's really nice.
Yeah.
And another favorite is one that's called Rainbow's End. And there's a shrub form of Rainbow's End, and there's a climbing version of Rainbow's End. But Rainbow's End itself is considered a miniature, but it's not like it's tiny. It just means that it's smaller than what would be a species rose. So the individual leaves and flowers are maybe smaller, but like the climber will still get 10 to 12 foot tall. And the flowers come out yellow with red edges, and then as the season goes, it kind of fades to orangish red. So you've always got like different colors on this rose at the same time, which is really striking.
Wow.
So you can get it in a shrub or a climber, and so if you want a particular kind, you'd have to make sure that that's what you were getting.
Yes.
Our water pavilion is one of the oldest sections of the garden. It opened, we believe, in 1985. And so there's a beautiful wooden structure there on the side of the pond. And that's where we have a lot of our ornamental grasses.
Yes.
The garden does have an ornamental grass collection, and that area has a lot of them, but perhaps some of our favorites are scattered around the garden.
Yeah. And I can't believe I'm even saying this. We are almost out of time on this episode. So the good news is we're going to be back with a part 2 with Marita, because we have so much more to talk about. We still need to hear all of her favorite grasses that grow really well in Utah in the water pavilion, and have her take us through other areas of Red Butte Gardens, as well as she's going to tell us the difference between xeric and xeriscape and a whole lot more. So that's the next episode of Gardening Utah. So stay tuned for that.
Thank you so much for listening to Gardening Utah. I hope that you and your family have an absolutely fantastic holiday season. I'm Jana Francis. Thank you so much for listening. And thank you again to Marita Tewes Tyrolt, the Horticulture Director at Red Butte Gardens. We'll see you next week on Gardening Utah. And remember, grow big or go home.
When you're ready to grow big or go home, make your neighbors green with envy. Get the Gardening in Utah podcast, Gardening Utah, available wherever you get your podcasts and at 860kkat.com/garden.
We are supported by ProgressivePlants.com. ProgressivePlants.com. They are your neighbors next door and experts at helping you choose the perfect and unique plants that will thrive in your location. Progressive Plants is passionate about helping homeowners, expert gardeners, novices alike choose the correct plant for your soil. They don't just grow plants, they know plants. Let Progressive Plants help you today. Just go to ProgressivePlants.com and check out their wide selection. You can also go to the Design tab and look at the expert designers that they have that can help you plan your perfect yard. Visit ProgressivePlants.com today.